My daughter and her husband saw my life's work and called it a lazy asset. They saw the garden I built for my late wife and called it overgrown. They filed papers to have me declared incompetent and my home a public blight, all so they could pave it over for condominiums. They thought they were silencing a sentimental old fool. What they forgot is that in a garden, the deepest roots are the ones you cannot see, and I have kept a record of every single one. Arthur McGregor, 72, retired horticulturalist. The first thing Arthur McGregor did every morning before the kettle even whistled was walk the garden. He'd slide open the old glass door and the air would meet him. It was never just air. It was a complex, living perfume of damp earth, the peppery scent of marigolds, the sweet, sharp tang of boxwood, and from the back fence, the impossible lemon and spice fragrance of the clearest dawn rose. This garden was not a hobby. It was a 40-year conversation. It was his wife's memorial. Arthur, at 72, was a man made of patient, quiet rituals. A retired horticulturalist, he understood the slow, deliberate language of plants far better than the clipped, hurried speech of modern people. His hands, gnarled and permanently stained with the earth, were the hands of a creator. Clara, his late wife, had been the garden's soul, its laughter. He had been its architect, its hands. Every stone path was one they had laid together, their knees aching in the cool dirt. Every towering oak was a milestone. The climbing rose that covered the back fence, the Clara's Dawn, was a cultivar he had spent a decade developing, a soft sunrise pink bloom he had finally perfected and named for her. It was his masterpiece. It had been 3 years since Clara passed. The silence she left behind was a physical presence, a vast, echoing space. But the garden filled it. The thrum of bees in the lavender, the delicate rustle of Japanese ornamental grasses, the steady, rhythmic snick-snick of his heirloom pruning shears. These were his companions. These were the sounds of life continuing. His daughter, Sarah, rarely visited. She lived in the city, in a tall glass tower, in a world of blinking screens and conference calls that Arthur couldn't and didn't want to comprehend. Her husband Mark was even more of a stranger, a man who vibrated with a restless digital energy and spoke in acronyms, KPIs, ROIs, assets. He was a man who, on his rare visits, never once looked at a flower. The quiet, as it turned to be, was the first thing to go. It was shattered by a Sunday visit. Sarah and Mark's sleek, silent electric car was the only thing that announced their arrival, its tires hissing on the gravel driveway, a sound as alien as a serpent in the stillness. "Dad!" Sarah's voice was bright, brittle, and a half-octave too high. Her perfume chemical and sharp against the garden's soft air. Mark stood on the porch, his eyes not on Arthur, but scanning the property line, his gaze lingering on the deep, wide lot. "You've got so much land here, Arthur," Mark said. It was not a compliment. It was an assessment. "Prime location. The property taxes must be eating you alive." "I manage," Arthur said, his hands instinctively finding the deep pockets of his old flannel shirt. "That's just it, Dad," Sarah chimed in, linking her arm through his. Her touch felt wrong, a performance. "We're worried about you. All alone here, this huge house, this enormous yard. It's just too much for one person. Mark and I have been thinking, we want to help." A familiar cold knot, one he hadn't felt since Clara's final days, tightened in Arthur's stomach. "Help how?" "We're going to move in," she announced as if it were a delightful surprise. Mark's company is fully remote now. We can take over the bills, the upkeep. Just let you relax. You've earned it, Dad. You can just potter around in your greenhouse. Mark put a hand on Arthur's shoulder. The gesture wasn't kind. It was a claim. We can optimize your assets, Arthur. This house is just sitting here, lazy. It's time to make this place work for you instead of you working for it. Arthur looked past them, his gaze finding the Clara's dawn. It was just beginning to set its spring buds. He saw his wife's face in its unfurling petals. I don't need help, he said, but his voice was a whisper, already drowned out by their bright, loud plans. They arrived 2 weeks later, not with boxes, but with white vans. Upgrades, Mark called them. The old humming refrigerator, the one covered in Clara's grocery lists and a magnet from their 20th anniversary trip, was replaced by a stainless steel monolith that beeped. Smart thermostats were installed, their blue-white glow alien on the old plaster walls. Mark took over Arthur's small, sunlit study, the one with the oak desk, and filled it with humming servers and glowing blue lights, turning it into a command center. The smell of the house changed. The familiar scent of lemon oil and old books was replaced by the smell of plastic, new carpet, and a sharp chemical air freshener that stung Arthur's eyes. But the first true casualty was the garden. Dad, the water bill is astronomical, Mark announced one evening, holding up a tablet that glowed with charts. And these specialty fertilizers you keep ordering online? The invoices are insane. It's just not sustainable. We're cutting back. The roses need that specific feeding schedule, Arthur protested, his voice tight. The azaleas are acid-loving. They need the peat and the iron supplements. We'll be eco-friendly, Mark said with a dismissive wave, and low maintenance. We're going to look into xeriscaping. Some nice ornamental gravel, maybe a few tasteful succulents. It's very modern. Arthur felt the blood drain from his face. You want to put gravel over Clara's garden? Don't be dramatic, Dad, Sarah said, not looking up from her phone. It's just dirt. We're making it more efficient, more manageable. They stopped paying the small landscaping service Arthur had used for mowing and heavy lifting. They claimed it was to save money, but Arthur knew what it was. It was a calculated, strategic neglect. It was designed to make his sanctuary look like a burden. He tried to keep up himself, but his 72-year-old back ached, and the weeds seemed to mock him, growing with a new, malignant vigor. The Clara's dawn, starved of its specific nutrients, produced fewer blooms. The ones that did open were pale, sickly, a ghostly echo of their former glory. Arthur retreated. He spent his days in the greenhouse, his last true refuge, potting seedlings and trying to ignore the strangers who had invaded his home. The second casualty was his independence. Dad, we need to talk about your finances, Mark said, calling a family meeting at the dining table, a place Arthur hadn't sat since they'd arrived. Mark spread out a sheaf of intimidating-looking papers. Your pension is fine, but this house, it's just a lazy asset. We've been talking to a financial advisor. The best thing to do to protect you is to put the house into a new, irrevocable trust. I'll be the trustee. That way I can manage the bills directly, protect you from liability. It's just paperwork, really, for your own protection. I don't think, Arthur began, his eyes struggling to focus on the dense legal text. Dad, please, Sarah cut in, her voice laced with that false, wounded tone. We're trying to protect you. You're 72. What if you fall? What if you forget to pay a bill and the bank takes the house? Just sign the papers. Let us take this worry off your shoulders. He looked at his daughter. He saw the child he had taught to ride a bike, the girl whose tears he had dried when she'd scraped her knee on this very property. He couldn't believe. He wouldn't believe that she would harm him. He was tired. His back hurt. The garden was dying. He picked up the pen. He signed the papers. He had just given his son-in-law complete legal control over his home, his land, his life. The shift was immediate and brutal. Mark was no longer a guest. He was the landlord. He spoke with a new, brisk authority. Consultants began to arrive, men in sharp suits who walked the garden with measuring wheels and tablets, never once stopping to look at a flower. They pointed at the great oak. They measured the distance to the fence. "Who are they?" Arthur asked, a cold fear gripping him. "Surveyors, Dad," Mark replied, already turning back to his screen. The lie was so smooth, so practiced, it chilled him to the bone. The final betrayal came on a Tuesday. It was raining. Arthur was in the greenhouse, transplanting a struggling orchid, the sound of the rain drumming on the glass his only comfort. He heard their voices through the open vent. They were on the back patio, under the awning, right outside. The zoning meeting is set for the 1st of the month. The petition to rezone from residential single-family to mixed-use commercial is filed. "And the developer is solid?" Sarah asked. "Solid as a rock, $4 million, and that's after the demolition costs. The old garden clause is the only hitch." "What old garden clause?" Sarah sounded annoyed. "Some ancient, stupid city charter. If a garden is deemed historically significant or a registered arboretum, it can't be demolished. That's why I had to let it look overgrown. That's why I cut off the landscaping payments. We're petitioning that it's a blight, a public nuisance. Overgrown, infested, a fire hazard. By the time the board meets, they'll be happy to see it paved over for a nice, clean condo building." Arthur's blood ran cold. Blight. "And Dad?" Sarah's voice was softer, hesitant. "He'll be fine," Mark said dismissively. "The trust gives me full authority to manage the asset. We'll use the first payout to get him a luxury apartment at Willow Creek Senior Living. Have a balcony. He can keep his little pots. He won't even have to sign the sale papers. I'll sign for him. The trust gives me power of attorney. He's incapable of managing his own affairs. It's all legal, all tidy." There was a pause. Arthur held his breath, praying for his daughter to protest. Then Sarah said, "Okay, good. It's for the best. He's just so sentimental. He can't see the big picture." Arthur leaned against the potting bench, his hand crushing the delicate orchid blossom he was holding. The sweet, cloying scent filled the air. They weren't just taking his house, they were erasing his life. They were paving over Clara. He stood there for a long time, the greenhouse glass fogging with his breath. He looked at his stained old hands. Incapable. Sentimental. A slow glacial rage, cold and deep as a taproot, settled in his chest. It was an anger so profound, it almost felt like peace. They thought he was just a sentimental old man. They had forgotten who he was. That night, Arthur did not sleep. He went into his study, now Mark's office, long after the humming servers had quieted and the blue lights had been dimmed. He ignored the sterile glass desk. He went to the tall oak bookshelf in the corner, the one Mark had never bothered to look at, deeming it clutter. It was filled with his old gardening books. But behind the row of Royal Horticultural Society manuals, there was a hidden panel. Inside was a small, fireproof safe. Arthur spun the combination: 0, 4, 1, 9, 7, 5. Clara's birthday. Inside, there was no money. There were documents. He pulled out a thick, leather-bound volume and a long, folded document, its paper heavy and embossed. He sat at Mark's glass desk, the coldness of it seeping into his arms. He opened the ledger. The first entry was dated October 2nd, 1980. The handwriting was his own, precise and clear, written with his old fountain pen. Item: Quercus rubra, red oak, planted, southeast corner, to mark Sarah's 5th birthday. Item: Rosa Clara's Dawn, cultivar, CV01,
first successful graft. Patent pending. Item: Digitalis purpurea, foxglove, planted along the back fence. Clara's favorite. Note: poisonous. Keep Sarah away. On and on it went. 40 years of his life. Every planting, every pruning, every success, every failure. It wasn't just a journal. It was a legal, botanical record, cross-referenced, dated, and notarized annually by his lawyer. Then he unfolded the embossed document. It was from the City Historical Society, dated 15 years prior. The Clara McGregor Memorial Garden, herewith declared a registered local arboretum and historical preserve, protected under City Charter 14.b, for the preservation of unique botanical cultivars, including Rosa Clara's Dawn, and neighborhood heritage. This status is irrevocable as long as the proprietor, Arthur McGregor, continues its cultivation. Mark hadn't let the garden become overgrown to declare it a blight. He'd had to let it go because his financial power of attorney could not override the city charter. He couldn't sell the land unless Arthur voluntarily abandoned the garden. They hadn't just lied to him, they had failed. They were trying to get the city to do their dirty work for them by petitioning to have the preserve status revoked. Arthur looked at the tablet Mark had left on the desk, its screen showing a 3D rendering of the condo building that would replace his home. He picked up his old-fashioned rotary phone. He did not call his daughter. He called his neighbor. He said, "Mrs. Petrov." "Yes, it's Arthur." "Yes, I'm fine." "I see you're still on the board of the Historical Society." "Yes. I was hoping you could tell me who on the city zoning board hates developers." The day of the zoning meeting, the room was small, hot, and smelled of stale coffee and cheap paneling. Arthur sat in the back row, wearing his Sunday suit, the one he'd worn to Clara's funeral. He was alone. Mark and Sarah were at the front table with a man in sharkskin suit, the developer. "Next item," the chairman grumbled. "Petition to revoke historical preserve status for 11-2 Oak Street, currently registered as the Clara McGregor Memorial Garden, on the grounds of public nuisance and blight." Mark stood up. He was slick, professional, a picture of concerned civic duty. He clicked a remote, a projector lit up a screen with photos. Photos he had taken of the garden at its worst: long grass, pale roses, unpruned hedges. "As you can see, gentlemen," Mark said, his voice dripping with false concern, "my father-in-law, Arthur McGregor, is a wonderful man, but he is no longer capable of managing this vast property. It has become a blight, a fire hazard, a haven for pests. It's frankly depressing. We are here with a generous offer from Mr. Henderson to revitalize this corner of the neighborhood, to turn this weed patch into 30 units of beautiful, clean, mixed-use housing." He showed the glossy renderings of the condo building. The chairman sighed. "It's a shame, but the pictures speak for themselves. This is clearly a case of neglect. We were told Mr. McGregor is in favor of this, but is too unwell to attend. Does anyone wish to speak against the petition before we vote to revoke?" "I do." Arthur's voice, though quiet, cut through the room like a pruning shear through a dead branch. All heads turned. Sarah's face went pale. Mark's confident smile faltered, his face twitching. "Mr. McGregor?" the chairman said, shocked. "We were told you were, unwell?" "I am quite well, thank you," Arthur said, walking slowly to the podium. He placed his thick leather ledger on it with a solid, definitive thud that echoed in the small room. "My son-in-law is a man of spreadsheets," Arthur began, his voice gaining a strength he hadn't known he still possessed. "He sees assets and liabilities. He doesn't see life. He showed you photos of a garden in distress. He is correct. It is in distress, because for 3 months he has blocked payment for its upkeep, in violation of the financial trust he swore to protect. A gasp went through the room. Mark shot to his feet. "That's a lie. He's confused. He's—" "Am I?" Arthur opened his ledger. The room fell silent. "This weed patch, as you call it, is a registered arboretum. That overgrown rose bush," he pointed to one of Mark's photos, "is the Rosa Claris Dawn, U.S. plant patent 9482, a cultivar I myself developed. That shaggy tree line is a row of Quercus rubra I planted on October 2nd, 1980, to mark my daughter's 5th birthday. This isn't just a garden, gentlemen. It's a 40-year botanical record. It is my life's work and my wife's memory." He held up the framed, embossed certificate, "and it is permanently protected by City Charter 14.B. "But it's a blight," the developer protested, looking nervously at Mark. "Is it?" A new voice boomed from the doorway. Mrs. Petrov entered, followed by 3 other members of the Historical Society and a young woman with a notepad. "I am Elora Petrov, head of the Historical Society," Mrs. Petrov said, her voice like steel. "We conducted an independent review this morning. The garden is not a blight. It is under-maintained due to what appears to be a deliberate and malicious attempt by Mr. Mark Jensen," she pointed a finger at him, "to financially strangle a protected historical asset, to defraud his father-in-law, and to illegally void a city charter for personal profit." The developer's face went ashen. He looked at Mark with pure hatred. "You told me the land was clear. You told me he was incapacitated." "This meeting is over." The chairman banged his gavel. "Petition denied, and I believe the district attorney's office will be very interested in Mr. Jensen's financial management of his father-in-law's trust." Sarah was staring at her husband, her face a mask of horror and disbelief. Mark was frozen, his mouth open, his eyes wide, with the look of a man who had just seen his entire future evaporate. Arthur just picked up his ledger, tucked it under his arm, and walked out of the hot, stale room back into the fresh air. He was home, pruning the Claris Dawn, the real landscapers having already been rehired, when the black car pulled into the driveway 2 days later. It was just Sarah. She got out, looking small and exhausted. Mark was not with her. "Dad," she said, standing on the gravel path. She wouldn't step into the garden. "The developer is suing Mark for fraud. The trust has been dissolved. They're investigating his accounts. We lost everything." I snicked a dead bloom from the stem. The sound was clean and final. "No, Sarah," he said, not turning around. "You didn't lose anything. You tried to take something, and you failed." "It was Mark. He pushed me. He said we deserved it. He said you were just a sentimental old fool who didn't understand money." "He was half right," Arthur said. He finally turned to look at her, his eyes as clear and cold as winter water. "I am a sentimental old fool, but you and he made a terrible mistake. You thought that was a weakness. You forgot it was my strength." He watched her cry for another minute. He felt nothing. Not anger, not even sadness, just an enormous, quiet emptiness. He was a gardener. He knew when a branch was dead. He knew it was time to prune. "You should go, Sarah," he said, turning back to his rose. "My garden has a lot of catching up to do." She stood there for a long time, but he did not look at her again. Finally, he heard the car door slam, the crunch of gravel, and then silence. But it was a different silence. It wasn't the lonely, aching hush. It was the rich, living silence of his garden, full of the thrum of bees and the rustle of leaves. He took a deep, slow breath, damp earth, boxwood, and the sharp, sweet, victorious scent of his wife's rose. He was home.